Indian Army, Air Force and Navy soldiers marching down the Champs-Élysées, reviving an abiding link between India and France, an association that may be forgotten in India but never in this country. On Bastille Day, France's National Day, India was the guest of honour, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi the chief guest, as both nations celebrate 25 years of strategic ties. And our Air Force's Rafale fighters flew overhead. In the run-up to the much-awaited moment, the josh was high.
As you can see, they are hard at it, getting ready, and it is quite a show over here. They are by far and away the most impressive of all the marching contingents that we've seen. We've got the Indian Air Force as well, who are equally impressive over there, but they are getting absolutely ready for what's going to be an absolutely fantastic parade.
अभी जो प्रैक्टिस के बाद हम मार्च के लिए तैयार है और मेरी रेजिमेंट बिल्कुल तैयार है मार्च करने के लिए और जोश पूरा हाई है.
At the end of the events, France's President Macron and Prime Minister Modi met the officers commanding the Indian marching contingent. France's National Day, or Bastille Day, occupies a special place in French consciousness. This day commemorates the storming of the Bastille prison in 1789 during the French Revolution. 74,000 Indian soldiers were killed in action in the First World War, many fighting in France and Western Europe. Indian soldiers returned to fight in the Second World War, a massive contribution against a global enemy, Nazi fascism. On the Champs-Élysées, with Pooja Arya, Vishnu Shom for NDTV. Well, President Macron and Prime Minister Modi did make their introductory statements, and we expect many more details later on. Let's just listen in to what the leaders had to say.
नेचुरल पार्टनर के रूप में देखते हैं. 2 दिनों में हमें आपसी सहयोग के सभी क्षेत्रों पर विस्तार से बात करने का अवसर मिल रहा है. आर्थिक संबंधों को और सुदृढ़ करना हमारी साझा प्राथमिकता है. रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी, ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, सेमीकंडक्टर्स, साइबर, डिजिटल टेक्नोलॉजी जैसे अनेक क्षेत्रों में सहयोग बढ़ाने के लिए हम नए इनिशिएटिव्स की पहचान कर रहे हैं. भारत के यूपीआई यानी यूनिफाइड पेमेंट्स इंटरफेस को फ्रांस में लॉन्च करने पर समझौता हुआ है.
Well, joining us now, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, the former Western Naval Command, Commander-in-Chief of the Western Naval Command, one of the most experienced aviators in the Indian Navy. We're joined by Ambassador Arun Singh, former Indian Ambassador to France as well. Admiral Sinha, let me come to you first. What does the acquisition of 26 additional Rafale fighters mean for the Indian Navy, assuming the contract negotiations carry on along expected lines?
Well, thank you, Vishnu, for getting me on the show, and also nice to see you in Paris. The Indian Navy carried out a shore-based test facility trial of the F-18 and the Rafale in Goa, and both these aircraft met the QRs as they set by the naval staff. I think what the naval staff did, that they gave their choice that they would prefer to have the Rafale if it is possible, because it is technologically it is the most advanced aircraft in that category. It is in that 4.5 generation, Vishnu. And secondly, we have had Air Force is flying it, and therefore the logistic support, the training, the maintenance effort, etc., can be together, which can save some money. So that is a very good part to happen. And I would think that it was many years ago, 2001, I was on board the Charles de Gaulle when she came on her first deployment to the Gulf in the the war in Afghanistan, and I saw this aircraft on board, first outing, fully sort of what shall I say? It was technically so advanced that you could plan the whole sortie on a cassette and fix it inside, and the pilot would just sort of drive that computer to achieve those results. So, and I'm talking about nearly 20, 22 years back. So I think that it's a very good selection, and Prime Minister Modi's government has done a very wise thing by going ahead with this, despite possibly maybe it is slightly higher on price. The price negotiation will go on, but in government-to-government deals, and if the Air Force gets its another 111 odd aircraft that they're looking at, if it is a Rafale, then I wouldn't be surprised that the French company will agree to start manufacturing it in India. Vishnu.
Admiral, I was on the Charles de Gaulle with you on that way back in 2001. I remember that and seeing the Rafales for the first time. But let me just go across to Ambassador Arun Singh. I think what was very important, Ambassador, was that in the joint statements which were issued, the Prime Minister stressed a lot on Atmanirbharta, and he made an interesting point when he said that submarines may be constructed in India to a French design, but perhaps even warship construction. In other words, Atmanirbharta will involve a collaboration between India and France, which would involve co-manufacture for the third-party needs and requirements, but manufactured in India. How significant is that as an announcement?
No, if it goes through, this is really the first stage of a thought and then going into discussions. And if it goes through, certainly it will be very, very important, because I think part of India's effort is not just to absorb technology, not just to do production in India for India, but also see if we can export out of India. Because to meet our, the foreign exchange requirements, there's a lot of foreign exchange outflow on the imports we are doing. And we are a major importer of defense equipment. So if you are able to export out of India, based on such collaborations, I think it strengthens our position in terms of supplying to others. It will, just like French supplies to us, have strengthened France's partnership with India. If we are able to supply critical items to third countries, either by ourselves or in partnership with France, it will strengthen our relationships and our partnership with those countries. So given the effort being put in India in exporting out of India also defense equipment, certainly it will be an important dimension. And also if the French agree to do co-production, to transfer technology to India in a significant way, I think it shows the confidence that they both have in the relationship going forward.
Suhasini, is it not interesting that the Prime Minister to the Indian diaspora yesterday, and even in his joint statement today, spoke about the key values of the French Republic. He spoke about equality, fraternity and liberty, and he has expressed yesterday how these are values important to India as well. It's important that the Prime Minister brings this up, because even in the United States, issues of whether India's democracy is no longer what it once was were brought about, the issue of human rights, etc., etc. I find it interesting that the Prime Minister would proactively bring up the entire issue to re-establish or reassert India's diplomatic credentials. At least that was what the effort appeared to be.
I certainly think so. Of course, when the Prime Minister speaks to a diaspora audience, that's a very different audience, and I think he was looking for shared values, an idea of coming together. But look, the people-to-people connect is clearly a big part of this trip. If you were to categorize what Prime Minister has already spoken about, there seem to be very clearly three tranches of where the India-French relationship are going. One is the strategic roadmap that he spoke about, the next 25 years. And this is going to include everything strategically that India and France already do together and can do more of. So not just in terms of defense exchanges, military exercises and all the rest, but also the areas like space, where France wants to do a lot more in terms of training astronauts together. The second part of that, it was an interesting announcement from the Prime Minister himself that India is interested in SMRs, small modular reactors, that France, in particular EDF, the new company that has come out of Areva, have been looking to pitch these smaller reactors to many countries in Europe. So far, they have not been pitching them in India. I mean, if a small reactor is about 340 megawatts, the ones that are meant for Jetapur, for example, are 1600 megawatts. So it's very interesting that Prime Minister Modi himself announced that that was one area. And then the second part are the deals. Clearly, whether it was because of the 2015 experience with Rafale or not, Prime Minister Modi did not go into the defense deals other than saying co-development. rather than just co-production are on the agenda. And in that, he said, whether it's planes, whether it's submarines, that's where we will be heading. And the third part, as I said, was this people-to-people connect, not just the consulate in Marseille, but also the new visas for Indians coming from France. There are already new talent visas also to attract Indian students. France wants to double from 10,000 or so to 20,000 Indian students through various things, scholarships, changing the language of education and all the rest. So I think those are the three silos in which the two leaders...
Lots of key points over there, Suhasini, which the Prime Minister brings up. General Narasimhan, the significance of Indian soldiers and this regiment, the Punjab regiment, marching down the Champs-Élysées, perhaps was not lost on people over here, but in India it's a forgotten chapter of our history. But it does appear that this Prime Minister and this government wanting to assert the role, the international role that Indians have played more than 100 years back.
It's absolutely true. Not only the Punjab regiment, we also see the Rajputana regiment there, which actually marched down the Champs-Élysées. And there's a true honor for the soldiers who fought and died alongside the French soldiers 100 years ago. And there's a good honor, and it is also a recognition of the Indian Army's contribution to the world peace, which is at this point in time is again being contested in some form or the other. And that is the role that the Indian Army played, not only in Europe, but in other countries also. And there's a true recognition of that role that the Indian Army has played over a period of time.
Michael Kugelman, I was talking with you a couple of weeks back and we were looking at the India-US strategic relationship. But it is interesting though, and some would suggest that India has played, our cards really, really well in having multiple strategic partners. France may not like the point that, we talk very closely with Russia, but the fact that India actually has these strategic options, it sort of works well in the Indian context. And, the argument that India is truly, has an independent foreign policy is borne out by these different relationships.
Well, yes, I would agree with that. And in fact, Modi's visit to France is the third trip that he's made to a key Indo-Pacific power. Let's remember he was in Australia not that long ago. He was, of course, in the US a few weeks ago, and now he's in France. And each of these trips has followed a very similar pattern, where there's been some significant breakthroughs on defense cooperation with some very notable deals, also significant forward movement on science and technology cooperation, clean energy, and of course the people-to-people issue and the diaspora connect. We've seen that in all three of these visits, and the messaging that I'm hearing with this Paris visit, as well as the visits to Australia and the US, the messaging is very similar. Natural partners, strategic partners. So yeah, India has been able to really forge significant and deepening relations with major Western players, even as it continues to maintain that special relationship with Russia, which I think attests to the success to this point of its strategic autonomy policy.
Rajaram Munuswamy, the president of Gopi of France, joins us as well. Mr. Munuswamy, apart from the strategic aspect of this visit, which we've been talking about, what are some of the other key business opportunities that France sees in India and vice versa, in fact?
I think most probably more than the business part, as everyone was insisting, it is about this diaspora connect. So if I can mention a few things which has been already on the pipeline and which has been announced by Prime Minister, it's about the OCA card, Overseas Citizen of India card for the Caribbean island Indian origin people who are there for nearly now more than 170 years, the forefathers of indentured laborers who came there. And also on the business side, I can insist about this, the one part which has been signed nearly 3-4 years before, it is about MMPA, Migration Mobility Partnership Agreement between India and France, which is a bilateral thing, which can be also put in motion now. Since nearly 6 months, it's under a process. So this will also enable the Indian migrants, qualified people between France and India on both the sides. And as mentioned about the students, master's degree program who can get 5 years work permit after finishing their masters. So we can say that we are living this 25th year of strategic partnership anniversary day, we can ensure that the coming years we will be doing more and more mutual strategic partnership business, and whatever is being said, it is in motion, and I can
lots
see
of areas
that
of opportunity, no doubt about that, sir. I just wanted to keep the strike rotating. Let me go across to Dr. Tara Karta. Dr. Karta, could you speak of the nuclear relationship between India and France, the fact that we're looking at modular nuclear reactors? We've also wanted a large-scale involvement of France in the civil nuclear area earlier on as well. So how important is this a part of the relationship?
Well, if we moved away from the EPR, I think it's a good thing. If that's what it means in terms of small nuclear reactors, because the EPR has had a very bad reputation. Let's put it. There's no other way to say it. They've had cost overruns. They've had huge issues in France, in the UK. I think in China as well. So that if that has been set aside for smaller reactors, that's a good thing. Number two, but however, I would assume that way back in 2018 we had this solar alliance with them. France is using a lot of it's pushing for renewable energy a lot. That's a fantastic thing. I would hope that we could cooperate there. But I think, the main thing is, France has never been one to lecture us. They've never been part of this whole NPT gang. They were the ones they are similar in terms of their nuclear autonomy. Both of us have nuclear autonomy. So that kind of underpins the whole relationship. Because even within NATO, France has its very distinct place within NATO, which you saw recently in the summit in Vilnius. I think that was how many days ago, where they have earlier Macron has stood for European autonomy within the country, not just hanging on to the coattails of the US. That doesn't mean we have a problem with the US, but it does show France as an independent entity. And that marries very well with our own, pattern of autonomy, the way we've been conducting our foreign relations, as you very rightly said. We've been kind of spreading it out, looking at all. France, I think, is now more than 20% of total defense deals. So there is a lot of, there's actually a kind of partnership here which is based on these fundamentals.
Sure. Admiral Sinha, let me just come back to you, sir. Submarine building. Now, that's an area where we've not fared well at all, because the pace of submarine construction in India, the pace of acquisitions has been dreadfully slow. I mean, we've had a 30-year program to manufacture submarines, and what have we manufactured? 6 out of 30 so far in the conventional space. That's something we need to work at. How important is it, therefore, for us to consider the manufacture of 3 more submarines of the Scorpion class at Mazgaon docks?
Extremely important, Vishnu. You are aware that our numbers are inadequate at the moment, and some of them are getting decommissioned in next 6-7 years. Here we have in MDL, the line is already operational. People are skilled, they have been trained. Let's not lose them. And more importantly, these 3 submarines, they have agreed, the French company has agreed to fix the Indian DRDO built air independent propulsion in that and carry out the trial and certify it, so that subsequently either 75 India or the rest too, whenever 75 India comes, then India can have its own AIP and possibly have its own submarine design. That is number one. But more importantly, you mentioned about EPR, and Suhasini also mentioned, I think Tara also mentioned about it in passing. I wouldn't be surprised that EPR of a particular category, India is also looking for the SSN type of submarine, the nuclear powered attack submarine, and that could be one of the reasons why the diesel submarine production has been now targeted at only 3 and not more. Because then what happens is that at one point in time, some of us were suggesting that don't make too many diesel submarines. While you're making 2, 3, 4 extra submarines, please head for SSN. So Navy is actually pitched for SSN, and I wouldn't be surprised that the smaller miniature reactor, nobody is going to give it to India. If the French agree, I would think that will be a very good development. Vishnu.
No, and this is interesting, Admiral, that you've let the cat out of the bag, because India has been looking closely at French designs for a very long time. There is a nuclear variant of the Scorpion class submarine that is already in service. The Barracuda class is available. Australia didn't accept it, but we've now got a couple of years of experience using French conventional submarines, and therefore the transition to a nuclear-powered submarine of a French design would actually be quite interesting. Do you believe that legally the transfer of nuclear reactors to India from France for military use would be tenable?
Absolutely, because it is not amounting to a nuclear weapon, Vishnu. As you know, it is the limitation or any legalities are only for something like an SSBN. Because but where in our case we make our own SSBN, we make our own nuclear missiles, and therefore I don't see there is any difficulty in doing that. Just now Australians are they have in AUKUS they are getting the nuclear propulsion submarines. They are going to build it with the help of US and UK, and also in the meantime they will be given some on lease. So I think there is it does not break any rule. It does not proliferate into nuclear weapon. It's only a nuclear propulsion, and therefore I don't foresee any legal issue on that. Vishnu.
Suhasini, Heather, let me come back to you. The entire Asia Pacific area, the fact that France has a lot of interests in the Indian Ocean region, they've got territories in the Indian Ocean as well. That's something again that people tend to forget. And therefore, when we talk about Asia Pacific security, how is France such an important partner?
Well, absolutely. And the thing about France is, apart from its own interest in the Indo-Pacific, and as you pointed out, islands like the Reunion Island, I think a majority of its economic, the EEZ as it's known, zone is actually in the Indo-Pacific rather than the Mediterranean. So France has a lot of interest in the Indo-Pacific, and it does work with India. Remember, France is the only country India does joint patrols with, and works in various ways in the Indian Ocean, whether it is in terms of doing exercises together. Now the idea that perhaps like Reunion and the turnarounds that are possible there, that there could be some kind of quid pro quo with India's Andaman Islands as well. And I think the third area where they are looking at is how they can work together in some of the Indian Ocean region, Indo-Pacific, smaller countries that need some kind of help with funding, particularly in the area of startups. Above all, Vishnu, when you ask the question of why France's relationship with India is actually a little, stands out at all, it is because it is also based on strategic autonomy. Neither side is trying to pull the other into any kind of allegiance or any kind of larger grouping in that sense. France, remember, just now came out publicly and said that it opposes NATO plus, the NATO plus plan to have NATO working out of the Indo-Pacific and even to engage, apart from Japan, New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, but also engaging India. And France has actually said they oppose it openly, which is why that entire proposal didn't go through at this time's NATO summit in Vilnius. So what you're seeing in terms, and you were talking earlier about shared values, is overarching idea that the strategic partnership is underpinned by the sense of strategic autonomy. It's something France has articulated since the 1950s and something India very, very deeply believes in since its independence.
Sure. Ambassador Arun Singh, what for you is the big takeaway of this visit?
I think for me the big takeaway is a signal that the two countries are still making effort to consolidate the relationship further. The fact that the Prime Minister was invited as a special guest on Bastille Day, which, as was mentioned, is a rare thing, and I think they're looking at the overall dimension of the relationship. There's defense cooperation, there's cooperation in civil nuclear energy, there's space cooperation, and one effort that is being made, which is new, is strengthen the people-to-people dimension of the relationship, and that has been weak partly because of the language issue, because not many Indians speak French. So getting more Indian students to France, allowing them to work there for 5 years, that will help build in the next stage deeper economic and technology partnership, which would be important. Because while in Europe, our main strategic partnership is with France, but in terms of trade relationship, our trade with Germany is almost twice the trade with France. trade with UK is more than the trade with France. So that's an area that we certainly need to do far more work.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us and, sharing your thoughts on a very important visit. We still have the Foreign Secretary's press conference this evening where we expect many more details to come out. The Prime Minister will now be on his way to the United Arab Emirates. He leaves in the early hours of Saturday. We've been talking a great deal about the Rafale fighter and the possible induction of the Rafale into the Indian Navy and on board our new aircraft carrier, the Vikrant, and the older one, Vikramaditya, as well. This is what the acquisition of the Rafale means for India. If this jet enters service with the Indian Navy, it'll transform the capability of the Navy's carrier arm. In simple terms, the Rafale M is among the most advanced fighters ever developed for operations on aircraft carriers. An all-weather fighter with state-of-the-art avionics and weaponry that will enable the Indian Navy to dominate hundreds of square kilometers of airspace around an Indian naval battle group. The Navy is looking for between 26 and 30 jets. The Rafale M, if acquired in a multi-billion euro deal, will serve primarily on this ship, the INS Vikrant, India's first indigenous aircraft carrier. At the moment, both the Vikrant and the Russian-built Vikramaditya operate the MiG-29K jet, a fighter that has had massive serviceability issues. Though the Indian Navy has worked hard to address the issues, a 2015 report of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India has said serviceability of the MiG-29K ranged from just 15.9 to 37.3%, while serviceability of the twin-seat MiG-29KUB was better at between 21.3% to 47.1%. The report also pointed to serious design defects with flight safety implications. To address the shortcomings of the Russian-built MiG-29K, India evaluated both the US-manufactured Boeing F-18 Hornet that you see being tested in Goa and the Rafale. The French jet won the fly-off, but acquiring the Rafale a year before elections could be a political hot potato. The Congress had built its 2014 election plank around allegations of corruption in the 7.8 billion euro acquisition of 36 Rafales for the Air Force, charges which were eventually dismissed by the Supreme Court, which gave a clean chit to the government in all three aspects: decision-making, pricing, and the selection of an Indian partner, in this case, the Anil Ambani Group. For the Indian Navy, the acquisition of these fighters couldn't come a day later. The Chinese Navy, which now has 2 aircraft carriers in service, with a third larger one about to go into trials, is expanding faster than any other navy in the world, both in terms of numbers of frontline warships but also qualitatively. India has no choice but to match this growth with technology. The Rafale M is seen to be a cornerstone in that effort. Vishnu Shom for NDTV. The Prime Minister spoke about the possibility of technology transfer as far as submarines are concerned, and the Defence Acquisition Council has already cleared contract negotiations between India and France for 3 more Scorpion-class submarines to be manufactured in India. India already operates 5 of them. A 6th one will shortly join service. They were all built in India. But what really is the future of submarine building in India, and why is a deal, even if it is for 3 submarines, so very important? This is the Fela, one of 6 Indian Navy Scorpion-class submarines made in India to a French design at a project cost of $4.2 billion. That's 23,652 crores. 5 of the submarines are in service, 1 is presently in trials. France has offered India 3 additional Scorpions, again to be made in India, if a contract is eventually signed. India's conventional program to build submarines is woefully behind schedule, and most of the existing fleet of submarines is now very old. India operates a mix of 16 Russian, French and German designed conventional submarines, The first Russian and German submarines still being operated are now 37 years old. India also has 2 indigenous nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, with a third one fitting out. Way back in 1999, the Defence Ministry had approved a 2-phase plan to construct 24 submarines over a 30-year period. By 2023, this year, just 6 submarines, all of the French Scorpion class, have been constructed. A parallel program to build a second line of submarines, called the Project 75I project, is yet to see light of day. And of 6 nuclear-powered attack submarines to be built in India, not a single one has entered the water. In the interim period, the Indian Navy keeps upgrading its existing fleet of submarines, a costly, time-consuming affair with clearly diminishing returns. Which is why a repeat order for 3 Scorpion-class submarines achieves 2 goals. It allows the Navy to add to the size of its fleet while ensuring that the skills picked up at Mazgaon docks to build submarines, an extremely difficult task, is not lost. Vishnu Shom, NDTV.
Well, the historic significance of Indian soldiers marching down the Champs-Élysées is something that's so important. We've spoken about it. Some of the marching contingents over here, those regiments, the Punjab regiment, for example, the Rajputana rifles, they have had a historic role. They fought in the First and Second World War, and therefore them being over here, very, very important indeed.
A 100 years ago, they fought in one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. A war so brutal that it left 16 million dead and more than 20 million wounded. Did you know that of those who were killed in the First World War, 74,187 were Indians?
They were the largest military volunteer force in history. More than 1 million Indian soldiers served in the First World War. In Western Europe, in France and in Belgium, more than 138,000 Indian soldiers participated in the war. They are remembered over here in war memorials and cemeteries in many parts of this country, Belgium.
100 years ago, Indian soldiers fighting for the British against the German Empire fought in Western Europe, German East Africa, Mesopotamia and the Northwest frontier. These were no ordinary battles. These are the Flanders fields of Belgium today, lush agricultural land, rolling countryside. 100 years ago, these were fields of death. Fighting to defend the town of Ypres, a defensive line against a German onslaught towards the Allied ports of Calais and Boulogne-sur-Mer, Indian soldiers were among the first victims of chemical warfare in military history. As waves of sinister chlorine gas came rolling in, Jawans here were asked to urinate in their turbans and press it to their faces. Many died a miserable death in trenches like this. German artillery shelling was in fact the greatest killer.
These places were really infested by vermin, lice, rats, mice, you name it. The bread they had to be extremely careful where to hang the bread and keep it in a bag, because otherwise it would completely eaten by rats. There are haunting stories of people waking up at night with rats crawling all over them. And the rats were in no man's land, and they were in the trenches.
Sick, cold, outgunned and used as cannon fodder, the infantry divisions of the Indian Expeditionary Force were withdrawn to Egypt in October 1915, a year after being deployed, with 2 Indian cavalry divisions remaining on the Western Front. Today and every day, Indian soldiers who fought in the First World War are remembered here, at the stunning Mena Gate, at the center of Ipoh. And every evening they are honored at a small ceremony for having stood shoulder to shoulder with their allied comrades. Though there is a small Indian memorial here, constructed belatedly, the use of the emblem of India is a historical inaccuracy. While the notion of India was alive and well a century ago, the men who fought here fought for the British, and many of the regiments which participated also became part of the Pakistani army after partition. But back then, these men fought together, united by a bond that only soldiers in the heat of battle can know.
In my view, and in the judgment of history, yes, these regiments did very well. It's very, very hard to compare them to British regiments because they were trained for warfare on the northwest frontier. They were trained in a different way to continental armies, but they had to come to do a job on continental Europe, which they were not prepared for. In many ways, they were just as good. In other ways, they were not as well prepared.
The role of Indians in the First and Second World War remain forgotten chapters of our history. The strange irony is that India Gate, the site of independent India's Amar Jawan Jyoti, was originally built as a tribute to the Indian soldier often fighting thousands of kilometers away in the First World War, a war that came to redefine the nature of conflict. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Well, there you have it, a very, very important visit by the Prime Minister. Let's see what all it comes to. But for the moment, it's signing off from Paris with camera person Pooja Arya, Vishnu Shom for NDTV.